Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. So, let's start my talk, I suppose. Now, there is a short, simple, and very straightforward question that many people have asked me, but I have almost always failed to answer. The question is, where are you from? You see, for the first 25 years of my life, I grew up across 4 different continents and 6 different countries. I was born in Vietnam, but I grew up in Sweden, Japan, England, Belgium, and America. There is a term for people like me, and we are called third culture kid or individuals, which also has an official definition of somebody growing up outside of their parents or their nationality's culture. Now, to many people, and myself included, I do acknowledge that my upbringing has been an immense privilege to be able to experience such a diverse variety of cultures. My childhood was anything but boring, and it really, really shaped the curious and adventurous spirit that I have today. But like many things in life, it wasn't always rainbows and sunshine. Being a third culture kid means that I have to always adapt to new environments, whether that is going to a new school, making new friends, or learning a new language. It's actually an ongoing process of uprooting and of change. And so when people ask me, where is home? I tend to answer in a very awkward way of saying, well, home is everywhere or home is nowhere. This very complicated and odd explanation of my home and identity used to make me feel really, really lonely. It's because I really think that nobody can really relate to or understand my story. You have to remember, I am one of the very first few Vietnamese third culture kid out there. I felt like an oddball when I was in Vietnam, and I also didn't feel like I was belonging anywhere when I traveled abroad. Now, looking back, I realized that my upbringing has very little sense of stability. Do you guys know this question that you sometimes get asked by your friends, your dates, or sometimes even your employer? It goes something like, if you were to describe yourself in 3 words, what would it be? Well, I can tell you that I'm very Vietnamese in what and how I like to eat. But I'm also slightly Japanese with my expression. And I can be really British with my humor and my sarcasm. At times, I can be even overly optimistic, like an American. So if you were to ask me what my 3 words are, kind of look like this, you know, confusing, chaotic, as always. My multicultural identity has never been a problem for me making new friends, because when you live in a constant state of change, it sharpens your adaptability skills. But my lacking sense of not belonging to one place or one home was for a long time a deep insecurity of mine, because I just didn't feel like I could fit in anywhere. It wasn't until I became an etiquette instructor that I finally could connect my dots and realize that my multiple background can actually have a purpose. It all started when I worked for a big educational corporation. That's when I realized that students, in preparation of studying abroad, most of the people were focusing on the hard skills. You know, the usual English, math, science, but nobody was really paying attention to the cultural language of the place that you're supposed to go to. In another word, how to behave in that culture. Because if there is anything that my multicultural identity has taught me, it is that how you behave in a certain culture matters as much as whether you're qualified to be there or not. Because culture gap is a real thing. Culture gap can exist in between communities, organizations, even families, or any community that can build a culture. Culture gaps also exist in many different forms. It's a difference of values, behavior, education, and custom. Culture gap basically means that what is acceptable and right in one community can mean the complete opposite in the other. Let's take a small example of slurping. Now, if you are in Korea or Japan, or sometimes in Vietnam, slurping your noodles is actually a good thing. It means that you're really enjoying your bowl of food, and you're also paying respect to the person who made your food. It's a behavior with a positive connotation. But if you were to be slurping a big bowl of spaghetti in Italy, unfortunately, you will be perceived as poorly mannered. Same noodle dish, same act of eating, but can have two completely different meanings. That is culture gap. What many people don't realize is if culture gap is not properly addressed, it can have a very detrimental effect on the confidence and the mental health of the person who's experiencing it, which ultimately will affect their personal and professional life. Just imagine you being misunderstood by everybody around you all the time. It can be a very isolating experience. I once had a student who was very comfortable and confident in her body image before she went abroad. Because in Vietnam, she was very pale and she was very plump, which, as we all know, means she's wealthy and healthy. Then she went abroad and she realized that the standard beauty at her school was to be tanned and slim. And so all of a sudden, my student felt very, very left out, different. And also, sadly, she had felt the pressure to change. But the point is, she doesn't need to change, and she shouldn't. If only people were to understand the context of her culture, then her difference would not be questioned, but it would be appreciated. There is a reason why we as Asians like to stay out of the sun. Historically, people with dark skin were associated with people who work in the fields all day. And people with lighter skin were related to a different social class of the wealthy and the privileged of not having to work outside but indoors. Most of the people, when I say that I teach etiquette, thinks that I hold up a knife and a fork and teach my student how to walk with books on their head and how to open up the cup of tea. Unfortunately, they are right. But modern etiquette is not all about your knife and your fork. I believe etiquette is a form of communication. It's how you communicate through your behavior, through the way you dress, the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you eat, or even the way you compliment or thank someone. Etiquette is a custom code of polite behavior in a social group. It is protocols and manners. But that is also why there are many different types of etiquette. British, Vietnamese, Japanese, any community can have its own etiquette. But to learn and understand etiquette, we first have to acknowledge and accept that culturally, we're all very, very different. And then we have to respect those differences. It's only when we understand that different cultures have different way of doing things, that's when we'll be open ourselves to bridge those gaps. My multicultural identity has taught me many things. One of them is that although we have different skin color, hair texture, spoken languages, or places that we call home, there is one universal language that connects us all, which is a language of love and acceptance. We all appreciate respect, courtesy, and grace. And at its core, etiquette has always been a way to show our respect to others and to make others feel included. When you learn etiquette, that's when a Japanese man will try very quietly to eat his spaghetti in Italy. And an Italian man will also try very hard to slurp his noodle loudly in Japan, all to pay respect to the traditional custom. There's a saying, I hope you know this: when in Rome, do what the Romans do. In Vietnam, we call it nhập gia tùy tục. Etiquette is about having self-awareness of where, how, and why. It's to behave the right way, but in the right environment. Now, I've talked a lot today about embracing cultural diversity, but I would like to go further with another diversity, a different kind, the kind that is within you. Because what makes you different can also be a superpower. As I have realized that my cultural identity can also be a service to others. I now, as a job, can help students to blend into a new culture confidently. So it could be an act of service. I want to start with diversity within you by saying that stereotyping around the world has always been a problem, but possibly more significant in Asia, where we are expected to be cookie cutters, fit in the mold, don't stand out, be one-dimensional, be predictable. This notion of shying away from being different is actually deeply rooted in our Asian culture, where we are predominantly collectivistic in nature. In a collectivistic culture, individuals are seen as being embedded into a group identity. So your physical appearance, your belief, your values are not just a reflection of your own internal self, but also a representation of your family, your extended family, or even the community as a whole. I recently saw this funny meme on the internet. It looks like this. Western parents will always encourage their children to be themselves, but Asian parents will always encourage their children to be anybody but themselves. I'm sure you're all here today are familiar with the phrase "con nhà người ta." And so if we are anything different from con nhà người ta, then our parents may face possibility of losing face. This one-dimensional standard and expectation also is now being amplified into social media, where I'm sure you guys know that Instagram, if it's a good one, it would need to have a certain aesthetic. And so if you are a high-profile fashion influencer, always so glamorous, then maybe posting about your rough Sunday look will not fit your feed. Or if you are a serious and well-respected professor in class, but you just love to go clubbing at night, then that may be labeled as out of character. These one-dimensional expectation standard also trickles into other aspects of life, as fundamental as gender stereotyping, that woman has to be quiet and gentle, or comments like, "Oh, that awkward kid, he must be an antisocial." Even I was once actually guilty of this pressure. You see, I teach etiquette. And so I think a lot of my friends, even myself included, at times just expect myself to be really strict, really harsh, really cold, because that is what a traditional etiquette teacher looks like. And most of all, people just think that I eat with my knife and fork and my fancy dinner all the time. The truth of the matter is, can you guess what my favorite food is? It's the biggest image on the screen. I love my chicken feet. I love my tofu and shrimp paste even more. The question we have to ask ourselves is, just because I love my chicken feet and my shrimp paste and my tofu doesn't make me any less qualified as an etiquette teacher or a more quirky one. Because these days I get a really interesting question. People ask me, so Yenli, is there an etiquette to eat chicken feet? Yes, there is. There is a way, the right way to eat chicken feet. I will tell you later. I also once had a student. She was 18, and she was under a tremendous pressure to pick the subject she needed to study at university, because she was made to believe that whatever she chose, she would have to follow through, and that would set her up for the rest of her life, which means that whatever subject she chose, she would have to take a job on that field and stick with it. That is an incredible pressure to have at being 18. Because if you guys look back at your 18 years old, I wonder how many of you have really followed through your 18-year-old plan. I definitely didn't. Diversity is actually about accepting change and embracing those differences. Because in the word of my idol, Michelle Obama, I wonder if any of you have read her book, but she is suggesting that we are forever becoming, growing, and changing. What you used to like as a hobby may not be the hobby that you like now. What you used to think as an ideal job may also not be the ideal job right now. We are made out of many different parts of ourselves, and they are always changing. But to embrace the diversity that is changing within us, we are also opening ourselves to new possibilities, because we know that not one single event or one single thing can define us, whether that is our age, our culture, our gender, or our job, or the subject that you chose to study at school. To embrace the diversity within us is to actually understand that we are never the final product, but always a work in progress. Thank you.